Welcome back, everybody. My name's Rachel, and this is my book club. But that changes by this. I'm still conflicted about it. It was flawless. Today we're going to be talking about my latest obsession. So today we're going to be talking about Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I've also read Crooked Kingdom, but I mostly just wanted to focus on this first book because it's perfect. I saw this on a TikTok the other day and now I can't stop thinking about it. All of these books have stickers on them now, but they're not removable. They're like printed on the book, and I really dislike that. They should stop doing that. Now, I know that I should have read, Shadow and Bone, because that trilogy comes before Six of Crows and it was published, earlier on. So if I was being, a true reader, I would have read the books in the order that they were released. But I'm just really good at, reading books based purely on vibe and not on these weird laws that I've set for myself. I went into the Six of Crows book not knowing anything about the Grishaverse, not having read Shadow and Bone, which was completely fine. You can definitely read this series without having read anything else by Leigh Bardugo. In this book, we are set in Ketterdam, which is a city on a small island. And Ketterdam is essentially Gotham. In my opinion, there's no better way to explain it. If you are familiar with the show Gotham, I think the vibes from that show is exactly what is being written in this book. We are following Kaz. He's this very scary, intimidating crime boss, but he's also just a little boy. The interesting thing about Kaz is he is essentially like the mob boss of Ketterdam. We're introduced to these other criminals earlier on, these big old burly men who have been running the streets and the markets since before you were born, you little boy. But Kaz has risen to the top, being absolutely ruthless, and he has all this kind of mystery about him where he wears gloves and everyone calls him Dirty Hands. There's all these rumors that, his hands must be maimed or scarred and right? So you have all these rumors about this teenage mob boss running around Ketterdam, and he walks with a limp and his crow-headed cane. As a proper heist book, this book is set up just exactly how every heist story is meant to be set up. You have this introduction in the beginning where we see that there is this incredibly dangerous drug that has infiltrated the city. And what it does is you have these magic users, or small people who have studied the small science, right? They're called Grisha. And these are people who are able to essentially do elemental magic, is the easiest way to explain it. You have people like heartrenders, and you have fabricators and squallers, and they each possess a different form of what I would consider to be magic, right? Is the best way to explain it. There is this drug that has entered the city that allows these people who can manipulate the small science to channel their powers in such a strong way that they now have abilities that they didn't have before. And they now have the ability to take lives at the blink of an eye and turn the tides of the whole ocean and the moon, and they can walk through walls. And so there's a lot of really powerful magic that's introduced by Grisha who take this drug, and it poses not only a danger to society as a whole. People walking through walls is not ideal. So not only do you have these incredibly powerful magic users, but of course the Grisha have been heavily enslaved in Ketterdam and a lot of surrounding areas up until this point. So them having too much power is definitely a bad thing, especially in the eyes of the powerful people who have them enslaved. And beyond that, you might be all for, rise up, girl, break the chains, right? And as much as you might be for that, drugs are bad. And this drug causes severe addiction, where a lot of the Grisha who have been tested on and who have been using this drug become very easily addicted and often die very, very quickly from withdrawals or incredibly severe side effects, and so on and so on. So all around, this drug is bad not only for the people who don't want the Grisha to become too powerful, but also really bad for the Grisha themselves. And so this is where we are introduced to the heist. Kaz is drawn in by this powerful man and shows him all of the things that this drug is doing and how it is ravaging these perfectly fine people are now debilitated from use of this drug. And Kaz is shown all of this in hopes that he will gather a team to go infiltrate this prison so they can essentially kidnap the scientists who invented this drug in order to find out how to fight it. Kaz is offered, an insane amount of money, just an incredible amount of currency in order to pull this off. And being the crime boss that he is, he's completely driven by this insanely high number that he could use this money to do whatever he wanted to stay in the city and to really capitalize on everything and blah, blah, blah. And so Kaz convinces a lot of his friends, a lot of the people in his inner circle in the mob, to join him by telling them that they would get these millions and millions of dollars, or Kruge.
1 million Kruger.
Kruge. I kept saying Kruge when I was reading it, but I know that's not right. They will get these millions of dollars, and so even if they're not a fan of what they're doing, maybe they don't like the political implications of this. Doesn't matter, because they're going to get paid enough to forget and live all their wildest dreams thereafter. So it's at this point that Kaz is convincing now all of our main characters are being introduced. We're at that part in the movie where they're like, yeah, and this is 8-Ball, and she's the greatest hacker who's ever lived, right? We're essentially getting a Gotham Six of Crows fantasy-esque version of that introduction of all of our characters. So we have Kaz, who is our head man, right? Our ringleader. And Inej, who is his right-hand woman, also known as the Wraith. And we have Nina, and we have Jesper, and we have Wylan and Matthias, right? Inej, Nina, Wylan, Jesper, Matthias, Kaz. Six of Crows. Bam. You're welcome. And so we're introduced to all these characters one by one, of course. And the story starts off where we get Inej on board because she'll have money to go back to her homeland. We'll get Jesper on board. He has a terrible gambling addiction, so the money's good for him that way. And we get Nina, who is a Grisha. She's a heart render, so she is an incredibly valuable asset and needs the money so that way she can escape the nasty, disgusting city of Ketterdam. So we have our 6 characters. And this is where things start to really get interesting. Heist stories are so incredibly fun, and I think this book does a great job of that. But like every good book that really gets me in my soul, it's really the characters for me that really drive a book home. And the characters in this book are, I think, some of the most well-written characters, especially in young adult, that I have ever read. And that is not an understatement. That is just a fact. Something that's really incredible about this book is I went into this wanting a very fun YA book. I wasn't looking for something as long or heavy as a lot of the other books that I've been reading. I wanted something more kind of fun and exciting that doesn't take itself too seriously. But this book really blew all of those very YA expectations out of the water. You've got incredible world building. You have very individually fleshed out characters, and you have a lot of diversity, and there's a lot of politics and pop culture. Like everything that you could ever want to know about the world, you can piece together in your head and see it so visually that you could have lived in Ketterdam your whole life and understood what was happening because of how it's written. Something I really appreciate about how all of these many things were set up in this book is it wasn't the kind of storytelling where you're in the story, you're learning about the heist, you're in the present, right? You're all there, you're all in with your characters, and then the story has to stop in order for the narrator or the protagonist to explain, oh yeah, and the Grisha are people who use the small science, just so you know, and then there's also this kind of Grisha and this kind of Grisha and this kind of Grisha. Okay, back to the story. It's very much like the information is sprinkled in there very casually. We learn a lot about the world through the dialogue between characters and the phrases they use and the way they talk about things. A lot of the knowledge that you gain about the world and the politics and the currency is just through the context of what's already presently happening. I found myself really appreciating that, because you don't need to be taken out of the story in order to learn about what's going on. You don't need to be taken away from the current events in order to piece together the setting or the magic. It's laid out very nicely throughout the book that you're getting the pieces of information that you need as you go, but in the context of the plot that is also unfolding at the same time. And it's really hard to explain that in an exciting way, but it's very exciting. It is so fun to read a book that does that, because it makes the chapters so much more fast paced, and it makes the story move so much faster because you don't need to be taken out of it. And I will never stop appreciating how much I found myself loving that as I read this book. All in all, the pacing of this book was really huge. It was very fast paced, which again, I think is really good for a YA fantasy heist novel. It has to be very intense and very fast paced. And so we're moving very quickly, collecting these people in our group that we need so we can leave, and then they get shot at, and then there's emotional tension, and then there's this, and then we're there, and then everyone almost gets arrested, and then we almost get blown up, and then this, and then big twist, and then this. And it's very non-stop. This book is 5 stars for a lot of reasons, and the fast-pacedness of it is one of them. And there's never a dull moment where there's like nothing happening and you're like, okay, blah blah blah, because even when they're not immediately in the action, you know, getting shot at for trying to sneak in around and whatever, even when there's not that immediate like violent action, there's still these kind of underlying political themes and a little bit of relationship drama over here, and and also like there could be a war starting over here, but that's not that important right now. And like there's always something happening, and it's really impressive because it flows so well with the story. I am just so impressed by how everything fits together so well in this story. It is the most like congruent storytelling I've ever had. There was just no flaws. Even if you're not into heist stories, maybe even the YA fantasy aspect isn't your biggest thing, that's okay. There's also, wait for it, the characters. This is pretty much the whole reason I wanted to write this video, is to talk about the world building and the characters, because it was the most impressive thing I've ever read. Okay. And you have Kaz, and we get to learn about his very troubled past and how he came to be the person that he is. And we learn about how Inej was kidnapped and sold into slavery, and how she came into Kaz's employ at a very young age. And we learn about how she has a different religion, right? She prays to the saints, and she follows these very particular kind of religious constructs in her daily life. And then we meet Nina, and Nina is a very driven, independent woman who has a lot to say, and she'll tell you exactly what she thinks, and I adore her as well. You have Jesper, who is this very sweet, sarcastic, but insecure guy with his super cool sharpshooting guns. And you have Wylan, who is the innocent little boy who is new to the scene but has a lot to gain from it. And so you have, oh, and then there's Matthias. And Matthias is there because he has to be there. He's been forced to go with them. And so you have our 6 main characters, and they're each incredibly unique. And something that's very fun is that we get to see chapters from all of their points of view, and each point of view is distinct from the other characters. And that sounds obvious, like, yeah, you're reading the story through someone else's point of view. But a lot of the times in a lot of books, when they try to cover an array of POVs, they get kind of lost in translation, right? You're just kind of watching the same story unfold with maybe just a twang of this character, right? And it's like slightly different, but it's all the same, and it doesn't really matter, and who cares, in my opinion. I think writing good characters in their own point of view is very difficult. Oftentimes it doesn't really seem that impactful to how the story is being told, right? It's more of just like a for funsies kind of thing. But in this story, each point of view you get allows an opportunity for you to see that character's relationship with everyone else, because each character has a different relationship with everyone, and it's written that way, and they speak to themselves differently. Their inner dialogue is very unique, and the way that they are, you know, the way that they're observing all their other friends and comrades is different than how Kaz is looking at the situation, than how Nina's looking at the situation. And it is the most invested I've ever been in so many characters. You know, normally you pick a favorite, and I do have favorites, right? But normally when you're given a wider cast of characters, you'll pick a favorite. You'll pick someone whose point of view that you're excited to get back to because that's the person you like reading, right? And while I did have that, of course, I still love Inej, and she's still my favorite. I think that there was something valuable that each character's point of view had to offer that was very integral to the story, and that was very important in keeping the book as a page turner, that there's something exciting you get to learn from each character when you get to their chapters. I don't even know what else to talk about this book. I'm just going on. I'm just so excited to finally share this with you guys. I've been thinking about this book for weeks now. Leigh Bardugo must have a character sheet for everyone that's like 8 pages long. Like single spaced, 8-point font, non-stop descriptions of these characters, because they are incredibly easy to visualize and incredibly unique. There's never any confusion with who is doing what. Everything just makes so much sense. The chemistry of the writing and the story with the characters and with each other, magical. So magical. Also, hot take, Nina and Matthias kind of bad for each other. They're not good for each other. I do love them, and I have to support them because this book was too good for me to do Nina dirty like that, but they are not good for each other in a lot of aspects. But that changes by this, but I'm still conflicted about it. They're fine. You know, Matthias is really a good guy. Deep down on the inside, he just has some prejudices to work through, and that is hard to witness. A lot of the times when I do these videos, I like just being able to talk about the story and what I thought as I read, but I really don't want to spoil this book. For all of the handful of you that are going to see this video, I don't want to spoil this book for you, because I really think that if you're even the tiniest bit interested in reading a fun fantasy heist story, I think that you have to read this unspoiled because it's so good. And so I don't think I'm going to go as in-depth into the story as I usually would. I'm just trying to hype you up to convince you that you should read this book. This has to be one of my favorite books of all time. Right. So far for Leigh Bardugo, I've read Six of Crows and then the second book, Crooked Kingdom, which is even better than the first. It is a great duology. And I just read Shadow and Bone. Shadow and Bone was a very easy read. I blew through that book in an afternoon, in a night. I blew through that book. Basically, I came here to say that Six of Crows is the most well-written YA fantasy book I have ever read to this day. It can feel very monotonous to read a lot of YA fantasy, even if you really enjoy that kind of thing. I think the stories are often so parallel to one another that it's very easy to get lost in it and very easy to want to stop reading it and move on to different genres. Because there's definitely a chokehold on a handful of young adult genres that just have exploded and become really, really popular, and so a lot of the stories are the same and therefore not feeling very unique or exciting when you read them. And I think if you feel that way, if you really enjoy YA books but you are kind of burnt out from reading the same thing over and over, Six of Crows is very, very perfect for that, because it still touches on all the things that are very enjoyable and fun about reading a YA book, but also so different and so well written and so nicely thought out and wonderful and diverse and complex and magical that I think that everyone should read this. I'm just gonna keep coming back to that. You should read this book. All in all, I treasure Leigh Bardugo. She is an author after my own heart, and I'm very excited to finish reading Shadow and Bone so I can watch the show on Netflix. If you've watched it, let me know what you think, because Netflix tends to kind of ruin some of the things that I love like that, but also they have some really good shows, so I'm gonna hold out hope that Shadow and Bone is at least pretty good. So really, I'm just quite happy that I chose to pick up Six of Crows. Six of Crows I gave 5 stars, easy. Crooked Kingdom I would give 6 or 7 if I could. So good. I don't usually turn too critical an eye to a lot of the books I read. I'm very much reading for enjoyment, and I've gotten very good at reading books and A lot of times reading books like especially Fourth Wing and like ACOTAR and a lot of those kind of series, there are very evident flaws. There are very clear, straightforward, like, that wasn't great, or that doesn't really make sense, or, that's not really necessary, seems like a waste of time. There's definitely very visible flaws in a lot of those series, and I've gotten very good at being like, oh, okay, that's how you want to play it, whatever, and just moving on and reading for the sake of reading it, because I just enjoy being able to be along for the ride. But I never had to do that with Six of Crows. There was never anything where I had to just like brush it under the rug and forget that happened. There wasn't anything that took me out of the story. I really think it was flawless. Thank you for joining me on this rant about how much I loved Six of Crows. Don't forget to add me on Goodreads so I can see what you're reading, and I'll see y'all next time.